Hi, Recap Man here. When a girl discovers a tens of meters tall giant, it takes her to its homeland, where she learns that there are giants that feed on humanity, and she helps the people in fighting back. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The film opens late at night at an orphanage in London. When the orphanage matron goes to shut the door, she discovers a magazine at the foot of the door that was dropped alongside the mail. She grabs the magazine but doesn't lock the door. Meanwhile, a little girl called Sophie, who is hiding beneath her blanket at the stairs, notices this and waits for the matron to leave her room entirely before going to lock the doors herself. After closing the doors, she approaches the clock and adjusts the minute hand to 3 a.m. While doing so, she informs us that 3 a.m. is the witching hour since only she is awake at that time, while the matron believes it to be midnight, and the other orphanage girls believe it to be 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. She then walks over to the matron's desk to organize the mail. She is engaged in that when she hears a disturbance outside and immediately rushes to look. Outside, Sophie notices a few intoxicated men making noise in the calm London streets. She takes it upon herself to correct them, warning them that the kids are trying to sleep and threatening to call the police if they don't leave right away. She immediately switches off the street light and closes the windows, and the men decide to leave rather than risk getting in trouble with the police. While Sophie is returning to her room, a weird shadow walks by, which Sophie ignores. When Sophie enters the room, the other kids are already sound asleep, so she lights her torch to continue reading the book she had been reading. Suddenly, she hears a loud sound outside, startling her. Even though Sophie is aware that getting out of bed at night is never a good idea, she still does it. Thankfully, it was simply the neighborhood cats playing outside. While Sophie is still fixated on the cats, she notices a huge hand picking up a garbage can. Sophie then makes eye contact with a frightening-looking monster and goes back into the room to hide. Just as she is ready to turn around, the giant puts his hand through the window and kidnaps her along with her blanket and book. The giant ultimately manages to escape from London and enter the countryside, where he keeps sleeping and passes through a dense cloud formation that leads directly into huge land and into a cave that seems to be his home. The giant hangs Sophie from a tree, then begins slicing a bizarre vegetable called a snozzcumber for his own dinner. Sophie jumps out of the blanket and climbs down to the window, where she attempts to escape. However, she kicks a thimble on the table, waking the monster up. He turns to her and informs her that she can't travel anyplace until she has wings. He then pushes the window, causing Sophie to fall onto the pan in his hand. While the monster is still preparing his meal, Sophie inquires about where she is. He tells her she's in giant country, but Sophie thinks no such thing exists. She is startled by a noise coming from the outside that she later discovers is being made by other monsters. Sophie becomes terrified and begs the giant not to eat her, but the monster chuckles and says he doesn't eat humans. Sophie then tells the monster that she was taken without her consent, and the monster does not dispute it. He adds that her parents must be worrying about her, but Sophie replies that he has taken her from an orphanage, which the giant was unaware of, and that she has no parents. Sophie, on the other hand, tells the giant that she hated being at the orphanage because the matron was cruel and imposed a slew of regulations with terrible punishments if they were broken. The giant takes Sophie's side and hands her back her glasses, prompting Sophie to ask if the other giants are nice like him. However, the giant reveals to her as he serves himself a platter of an odd-looking stew that the other giant eats humans. Then, Sophie wonders aloud why the monster kidnapped her. He continues with his poor English by saying that if he had left her, she would have spread rumors about having seen a monster, which would have aroused people's curiosity and resulted in his capture and placement in the zoo with the other animals. But Sophie says that she wouldn't tell anybody. However, the monster doesn't trust her. Instead, the giant tells her they would be living the rest of their lives here in giant country. While she's still thinking about running away, he throws her blanket over her and carries her to his ship bed, where he puts her in the crow's nest and warns her that if she attempts to flee, there are man-eating monsters waiting for her. Sophie then becomes enraged and corrects all of his grammatical faults, making him upset. She apologizes and observes a glowing item in one of the containers he has picked up. When Sophie inquires as to their substance, the giant replies that they are dreams. Sophie explains to the monster that she doesn't dream since she suffers from insomnia. The giant then picks up her book and begins reading it to her, which surprises Sophie because she doesn't know the monster can read. Sophie soon nods off as she hears the giant read. The giant enters the place where he had locked up all of his dreams. Following that, he plays around with a few of the jars. While this is happening, Sophie is awakened by the giant snoring and makes her way to the window and outside the cave. She tries to flee, but a sleeping monster stops her and attempts to devour her. She sees her giant buddy and begs him to save her, but he closes his door and she is devoured by the monster. She abruptly awakens from her sleep, only to discover that it was a dream. She quickly suspects the monster, and she tells him that he didn't have to make it so frightening. The giant warns her once more that if the other giants notice her, she may be captured. While speaking, he picks a drink called Frobscottle, which appears to be fizzing in the incorrect direction. Sophie points out the bubble, claiming that their bubbles are rising, and the giant informs her that this will only result in terrible burping. Sophie then adds that lowering the bubbles will result in an even more awful gas, but the giant informs her that it represents joy. He then drinks from the bottle and farts loudly. Suddenly, Fleshlampiator and another monster bursts inside the home and demands to know who Sophie's friend was speaking to. Meanwhile, Sophie is hiding behind the Frobscottle. Fleshlampiator pretends to have a splinter and demands emergency treatment. While caring to the splinter, Fleshlampiator smells a fragrance and asks Sophie's giant buddy whether he has a new pet. The monster tries to distract Fleshlampiator as Sophie climbs inside the snozzcumber on the table, unnoticed by them. Fleshlampiator then starts sniffing around the table, looking for the foreign smell, when Sophie's giant friend offers the vegetable to distract him. Fleshlampiator attempts to devour the vegetable, but Sophie's giant buddy notices Sophie's legs poking out of the food. He instantly steps in to rescue, telling his pals that he would rather eat humans than veggies. He throws the snozzcumber to the floor and attempts to trample on it, when the monster is distracted again by Sophie's giant buddy. Finally, he steps outside and takes the bottle of Frobscottle with him. The monster picks up the vegetable and sets it on the table, allowing Sophie to crawl out. The giant then leads her to the hidden location where he keeps his dreams. He assists her in washing herself and then provides her a selection of clothing to pick from. After dressing, the monster sees Sophie's red jacket and asks where she got it. She then tells him that it was from the scraps he gave her. He seemed sad at first, but when Sophie questions what's wrong, he says nothing. Then, when he enters the room carrying her in his arms, Sophie asks him what he does. The giant says her that she is requesting a crucial secret that he is unable to reveal. Then, because she would be with him forever regardless, Sophie insists. The giant then informs her that he captures dreams and sets her in a tree hollow chamber he has created just for her, and Sophie quickly requests to accompany him, but the giant denies. She was reminded once more that the other giants would devour her. Sophie, however, believes that she will undoubtedly be devoured if she stays here, but the giant continues to resist. However, after much persuasion, he finally agrees to take her along. When they emerge from the cave, the monster informs her that they must avoid being seen by the sleeping monsters. He cautiously tries to slink by them, but the Fleshlampiator catches him. Sophie falls off, dropping her blanket, and tries to hide in a neighboring cart. Meanwhile, the other monsters throw Sophie's pal about like a football.
Why you not?
The giants appear to be having fun and move on to another game as it begins to rain. Because they are afraid of water, they all retreat, allowing Sophie's friend to get her an escape. After they depart, one of the other giants discovers Sophie's blanket attached to his leg and sniffs it, realizing that there is a human in giant country. On the other hand, Sophie and her giant buddy go through a different dense cluster of clouds and arrive in a dreamlike place where darkness has fallen. The giant then explains to Sophie how, with his big ears, he can hear what the stars, plants, and animals are saying to one another. He also informs her that he used to be known as the Big Friendly Giant and asks what he might call her before plunging into a lake. She introduces herself as Sophie, and he asks her to jump in. After diving into the lake, both come out right side up with no signs of water trickling from their clothing. They are currently at the area of Dreamland where the giant collects dreams. Then, he runs into a special dream that is difficult for him to grasp. Sophie then assists him, and the giant ultimately captures the dream as it attempts to approach Sophie. He gives it to her and grants her permission to put it in a jar. After that, Sophie is urged to go collect more dreams by the giant. She eventually decides to do so after a brief hesitation, but she soon comes into contact with a red one, which the giant rips away from her and claims to be a nightmare. Sophie becomes fascinated and wonders what the nightmare says, to which the giant responds, "Look at what you've done. There will be no forgiveness." The Big Friendly Giant disappears, making Sophie panic and call out to him. The monster appears to have left the water, so he reaches in and pulls her out. Sophie chooses to call him BFG as they leave. They soon reach in London, where the giant visits houses to distribute dreams. He asks Sophie if she wants to share a nightmare or a dream, but Sophie prefers to make everyone happy. The BFG then gives the family in the house some sweet dreams. While doing so, BFG informs Sophie that he is as old as the earth and that giants do not have moms or dads. Additionally, he claims to be able to hear children's hearts, including hers. And while they watch the small child sleep, BFG tells Sophie about his dream of being friends with the President of the United States, which she enjoys. Later, the BFG and Sophie depart from London, and as they do so, they see the other giants departing as well. It appears that they have also been kidnapping and devouring humans. Suddenly, Sophie asks for her blanket and remembers that she must have left it at Giant Country, which starts to worry BFG. After then, the scene shifts to Sophie awakening from her nap in front of the orphanage. She realizes she has fallen asleep and questions the BFG about why he is giving her a dream. She shouts in frustration when she doesn't hear anything. But when he finally appears, he tells her that the other giants are aware of her presence in the giant nation, where she left her blanket. He warns her she isn't safe with him, but she isn't convinced. The BFG informs her of a boy who owns the jacket she is wearing. He adds that the kid noticed him while he was working and brought him to Giant Country. BFG informs her that the other monsters discovered and attacked the kid, and he blames himself. Sophie pursues him and assures him that she is not afraid, but he ignores her and walks away. When Sophie enters her room again, she whispers that the BFG can hear even the tiniest noises. Having an idea, she goes to the balcony and claims to be able to feel his presence. She makes the decision to leap from the balcony, but BFG saves her. They return to Giant Country while Fleshlampiator waits and enter his home. Sophie states that they require a plan as they hear Fleshlampiator enter the facility. He uses a huge umbrella to avoid the water, and Sophie hides. Fleshlampiator appears with the other monsters and shows BFG Sophie's blanket. He commands the other monsters to sniff the blanket and search for Sophie while destroying the lab. The BFG attempts to stop them, claiming that monsters used to be friendly, but Fleshlampiator claims that those days are long gone. Sophie moves throughout the facility while the monsters look for her. She enters the room that belonged to the boy who had previously resided with BFG, which is located inside a tree. Fleshlampiator searches the room while she hides, and the BFG becomes enraged. He collects bravery, grabs a hot metal rod, and pursues the giants. Fleshlampiator snatches the rod, but BFG uses a bucket of water to drive him out of the facility, declaring him an insult to giants. In the boys' room, Sophie notices a picture of the queen and has an idea. Meanwhile, BFG looks around the ruined lab while Sophie places the jacket on the bed. She exits the room and chats with BFG, who says he speaks poorly. She compliments him he speaks beautifully, which makes him happy. BFG is muttering to himself when Sophie draws his attention and says she has an idea. She advises him to approach the queen and request help. They work with intact dreams to conjure a dream for the queen. A nightmare is extracted by BFG and combined with many dreams that Sophie mentions. He combines elements of Sophie and himself into the dream. He puts it in a jar marked for the queen and keeps mixing as Sophie describes how she will show up on the queen's balcony, and the BFG will show up and claim to be her obedient servant. BFG declines, but we observe them in Buckingham Palace disguised as sculptures. They avoid a guard and walk throughout the palace as the BFG hears to everyone's breathing to find out where the queen is. When they get to her room, he opens the window. The BFG places the nightmare in the queen's room using a special trumpet, and it enters her. She had a dream about the giants, and the next morning she awakens frightened. The queen's maid, Mary, enters the bedroom, and the queen informs her that she had a nightmare. The queen claims she had a dream in which human-eating monsters were stealing kids from their rooms. She speaks a few of the names of the monsters, and a mysterious voice, which she is Sophie's voice, prompts her to say one of the names. When Mary reads the newspaper, she discovers that kids are going missing. The queen refuses to accept that monsters are devouring children and orders Mary to pull the curtains. As Mary pulls back the curtain, they see Sophie. The queen claims to have a dream in which Sophie was on the windowsill, and Sophie claims that the BFG, whom she refers to as her closest friend, is hidden in the garden. Mr. Tibbs orders guards to be on high alert, and the queen recalls her nightmare and understands Sophie and the BFG need her help. Sophie convinces the queen not to harm the BFG and summons him.
BFG?
But he refuses, and the others begin to distrust her. They tell her to go off the windowsill, but she screams and tells BFG to be courageous. BFG appears from the trees, surrounded by numerous guards, and Sophie reminds her of her commitment not to harm him. She calls Mr. Tibbs, who orders the guards to stand down as his hands shake with fright. Walking up to the queen's window, BFG introduces himself as her obedient servant. He claims he's come to help her, and she suggests she change her dressing robe.
A ruler of...
The queen contacts several people as Mary cleans and dresses Sophie. She enters the dining hall with Sophie as a butler guides BFG into the premises. They sit and ready to dine, with the BFG sitting on a chair placed on a piano. The butlers come in and climb a ladder to the top of the giant table. He receives a pitchfork and a shovel as cutlery. After taking a bite, he declares that he won't eat snozzcumbers ever again. The butlers bring coffee, which BFG spits out since he dislikes it. BFG pulls a bottle of Frobscottle from his backpack and presents it as a gift. Mr. Tibbs notifies the queen that the generals have arrived, and they enter the chamber. She informs them that they only have one chance to get into the giant country. They show BFG a map and ask him where the giant country is located. He tells them it's not on the map and offers them Frobscottle. They drink the drink as some individuals play bagpipes, and everyone farts. The queen steps up and declares that they are leaving for Giant Kingdom. BFG flees London, pursued by numerous helicopters. After passing through the clouds, they decide to wait outside as BFG and Sophie go inside his home. When Sophie asks BFG if he has a strategy, he brings back the nightmare she caught. He claims he'll use it on the other monsters. If it succeeds, they'll wake up stuck in guilt for all they've done. Sophie observes her dream in a container marked with her heart's desire. They stay outdoors while the monsters sleep, and she inquires her about her dream. He informs her that she will have a lot of success and a little misery in her life, and that she will remember her good acts forever. The BFG tells Sophie that she will awaken, but not in a land of giants since she still has more dreams to collect. She asks if he will still be able to hear her, and he reminds her of his giant ears. Sophie holds his pinky in her hand and tells him it's time. When the BFG realizes he has forgotten his trumpet in the palace, Sophie takes the nightmare. She rushes to the sleeping monsters, and Fleshlampiator awakens as she attempts to unlock the jar. She cracks the jar, allowing the nightmares to enter the monsters and cause them to fear as they awaken. Fleshlampiator prevents the nightmare from entering him and tries to hit Sophie, but BFG stops him. He grips the BFG while he telling him to stop, and Fleshlampiator attempts to smash him, but the soldiers comes. The soldiers captures the monsters as Sophie flees around the field to avoid getting struck. BFG grabs her as Fleshlampiator moves close to her, and he is carried away. Sophie describes how the monsters are transported to an isolated island and dumped in the ocean before the island. They throw snozzcumbers and seeds as the monsters' only sustenance, and Sophie adds they'll have to get used to it. Mary adopts Sophie, and she wakes her up. She claims to had a dream in which she witnessed BFG jump away. She could see his lovely garden and the interior of his home, where he made excellent stew. She claims she speaks to him when she is lonely because he always listens. She says good morning to him, and BFG hears her from his home and smiles. Subscribe for more video like this, turn on notification and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.